everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Be Investable, presented by Early Growth Financial Services and Be Investable. My name is Amanda Young, and I'll be your moderator today from the Early Growth team. I just have a few quick notes before we get started. This webinar will last about an hour, and that will include time at the end for questions and discussion. We will save time at the end for questions, so feel free to type your questions into the control panel and we will answer them at the end. The next thing to note is that this webinar will be recorded and sent to all the registrants with the slide deck within 48 hours. You can also find this recording and all of our recordings on our YouTube channel, Early Growth. So before I pass this off to our our speaker today, I'd like to tell you a little bit about EGFS. We're an outsourced finance and accounting firm. We work with early stage companies, helping them with everything from their day-to-day accounting to financial forecasts to taxes and valuations. So now without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelist, Michael Melfi of Be Investable, who will tell us a bit about himself and kick off today's discussion.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Amanda, and I am very enthusiastic to be here today. One of my favorite topics to talk about is Be Investable. By day, I am a partner at a law firm, Bodman, and we get to work with emerging companies and amazing growth companies that are often seeking funding and financing and venture capital, and I love doing that. And one thing that always comes up for us is how do we help these companies grow? What is the fuel? And that fuel typically ends up being funding, and so we often get asked about funding, about what it takes to go out and do that. And that's really where the cusp of Be Investable came from. And so, over the last decade, I've made an art of what does it take to be investable, from the podcast to the books I write to the speaking we do, and everything I do outside of the traditional legal practice is really around focused on how do we assist our clients and empower them to be investable. And so I'm very enthusiastic to be here again. Thank you so very much for having me. I cannot thank Early Growth Financial Services enough for the opportunity to present to you and share with you. I think this is something that everyone needs to talk about. I travel around the country talking about it because I think it's something that's only near and dear to my heart, but something that I like to empower other entrepreneurs with. And before we hop in and dive right into this, I want to ask a question. Whenever you see a slide like this, it's because I have a question coming right behind it. Since we are on a webinar, what we're going to use is we're going to use the chat feature. So in the navigation bar, you'll notice under attendees it says chat. You can type it in there, but I would love some participation, and this is participation. I can't see you nod and I can't see you talk, so I need to be able to read it. So the question I have for you to get started is, why did you attend this webinar? So if you guys could just take a second or two and write in there, why are you attending this webinar? And when I do these webinars and I do these presentations, I sometimes get people to say, well, I'm attending the webinar because the name looked interesting to me. Other people will tell me they're looking for funding. Other people will reach out, and they all have a different reason. My boss dragged me here, and they're sitting in the room next to me, so I'm here. Don't ask that question. But there's a lot of different reasons. And so if you could just type into that chat and share with us why you're here, that's very helpful. Hey, I'm interested in raising capital, or maybe I'm looking to start a business, or whatever it may be. That would be great for you guys to be able to share that, so we can really get an idea for some of the reasons why people are in. Amanda, did you happen to get any response that you can read off?
Yeah, a lot of them say that they're either in the process of fundraising or considering raising funds later this year. And then a couple are also owners of startups that are just looking for a general education on the topic for the future.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad you guys are here. Thank you so much for joining. And what we are going to cover is, at a very high level, the title is Be Investable. What does that really mean? I'm going to go over 7 key things to be investable. And then within each one of these things, I could talk probably for an hour. I obviously understand I have an hour, so I'm going to try to keep it to about 40, 45 minutes and leave the rest for you for questioning. I often get asked if I'm from New York. I'm not, but I talk really fast, and here's the reason why. The human brain processes about half of what it hears. So if I say twice as much as I want you to get, you should get everything that I wanted you to originally get. So that's why I talk so fast and cover a lot really quickly. But we're going to go through the 7 keys of being investable. Again, as we said, my name is Michael Melfi. I'm a partner at Bodman. We're a law firm here in the Midwest. We work with companies around the country to assist them in growing their business. And as I shared with you, after I sold my business and came back into this role, I really was looking at how can I assist entrepreneurs to be more successful, to have what they want personally and professionally. And what really resonated was the term we coined called Be Investable. And how can you be investable to yourself, to those around you, to your clients, to your investors, and ultimately to your team members. And so you'll notice a lot of what we do is I have a podcast where we bring on amazing people to talk to them and ask them, what does it mean to be investable? We host a monthly pitch competition and have an angel fund, and we often are funding and looking at companies. And we also have a magazine we put out that we talk about these concepts, these topics of Be Investable. Now, obviously, I call it Be Investable, and I know what it means to me. Another chance for you guys, I'd love to hear, what does Be Investable mean to you? Everyone hears it and they say something a little different. I ask this on every podcast, and when I ask this to the podcast interviewees, I've never gotten the same response. They all have the same underlying kind of tone or belly to them, but they're all different. And so I'd love to hear from you guys. What does it mean to be investable? And I ask this from a place of, what does it mean to you? Because if you're showing up here today, you want to know what that means. And so what I hope by the end is you get something out of it for yourself, which would be this definition of being investable and how you could get there. You're not going to get there in 45 minutes, but I think we could make a dent in that, so you at least have a game plan for how to get there. So the question is, what does be investable mean to you? Amanda, did we get a few responses on that one?
Yeah, we did. One says to be a company that people want to put their money into. This one's pretty similar. Ability to be an attractive investment as a startup, and to know what investors are looking for at a minimum to invest in a startup. This one says, I'm thinking investable means demonstrated growth. What else matters? And then a lot are along the same lines. This one says creating undeniable value for customers, whether that's a product or service.
Well, it's almost like some of these people saw the rest of the slides, but those are all great answers, and thank you for sharing that with you. And I believe a picture's worth 1,000 words, and so I have a couple pictures, because being investable to me is, and we're going to get into what that means in detail, but at a high level, the set of framework is, it's the ability to overcome obstacles. It's the ability to be resourceful. And in that resourcefulness, you do all those things. You get yourself ready to be investors. You get to talk the language of investors. You show traction. You generate revenue. Because at the end of the day, as an entrepreneur, an inventor, an emerging company, someone who's going out there, and I don't care if you're going out and seeking your first $5,000 or your first $5 million. It doesn't make a difference where you are. Every one of us has the same obstacles we face, and we come up against them. They're like brick walls. And we all have one, right? There's something that keeps you up at night. My favorite question is to ask often when I'm sitting with an entrepreneur is, what keeps you up at night? Because there is some brick wall that's keeping them up at night. And when you're able to become investable, when you're able to be investable and have a team and an organization that's investable, that brick wall is still there. It's not going to go away. It doesn't magically disappear. And I guess if you turned around, it would, but it'd still be there if you want to move forward. But you get creative, you get resourceful, you learn how to climb over it. You know how to, dismantle it by whatever means possible. You sometimes dig under it, or sometimes in some cases you just walk around it. But at the end of the day, what ends up happening is when you do that, when you do what it takes to be investable, something in your life or your business starts to look like this. And at the end of the day, we all have someone in our life where we wish looked like this. And most of the time, being an entrepreneur or going after funding feels like this, maybe looks like this. And for some of us, it really looks like this. We're just holding on for dear life. We don't know where it's going. But I'm here to tell you that there is a way to be able to demonstrate this. There is a way to be able to build this for your business and for your life. And so how do you really do this? How do you empower your team to be able to do this? And that's what it really takes to be investable. Because at the end of the day, we all came into this with an idea. Every one of us had an idea for our business. We started it for some reason. We said, I got it. This is what we're going to do. And we said, well, I'm going to go to sleep tonight, and tomorrow morning when I wake up, I'm going to have it all figured out. That's me, by the way, in cartoon character. And so basically we get up and I'm like, okay, the next day everything's going to be perfect. But what we fail to see is that inevitably in life, it doesn't happen like that. You don't go from being out of shape to in shape. You don't go from having no business to a business. You don't go from having no karate skills to being a black belt just overnight. There's a gap that happens there. And that gap is where most people end up facing obstacles, facing frustration. Because what happens is they get curious, they get frustrated, they come up against those brick walls and they stop. And that's the syndrome that you see with a lot of entrepreneurs. They aren't able to fight through. they end up stopping in their tracks there, and they don't take that next step to really figure something out, to see something new, to ultimately end up where they originally envisioned. And what's really interesting is, we love hearing the success stories of Starbucks asking 252 people before they got their first yes. We hear Dyson created thousands of models of the vacuum before they got to where they needed to go. And the list goes on and on and on. Walt Disney, I just heard last week, Walt Disney, the number of rejections was something like 160 some or something like that Walt Disney had before he got funded for his theme parks. Every success story that you hear, there's some story like that. Oh, the person got told no 50 times and they were living in a cardboard box and then this happened. It's because they were willing to keep moving forward, to take massive action, to do what it took to get there. I had the privilege and luxury of having a company that we sold, and my investor and one of the people who mentored me was a billionaire and is a very successful gentleman on the West Coast. And in the process of doing that, I say that not to do anything else but share that this gentleman's been there. And what was most interesting to me is I got to ask him how he was able to create success, how he was able to grow. And he shared with me, while he never used this diagram, what he said is, well, we started out in our basement, in our garage technically, and we used a credit card and we bought some stuff and we sold it and it went pretty well. And all of a sudden we started getting revenue and we were excited about that, but we didn't know where to go next. They hit a brick wall. And they pushed through and figured out a way around it. And in finding a way around it, they started to realize they needed a team. They needed to get some more credit. They raised a little capital and they hired a couple team members. Now all of a sudden they got a business doing millions of dollars and they think they're pretty successful. But then they hit another brick wall. They hit another obstacle they had to overcome. And they had to get resourceful and they had to continue to grow. And so they started to bring on management team and they realized that they had to empower a team because if they were going to continue to grow and be investable, to attract customers, to attract investors, and to invest and attract skilled talent, they really had to continue to grow. And so now they had a company, that was doing tens of millions of dollars, and they thought they were really successful. But then they said, well, hold on, we're going to hit another ceiling. And that's when they started to bring in a management team who understood how to grow organizations and take them to the $100 million level and become a $100 million organization. And it was interesting because he didn't use brick wall or obstacles, but when I asked him, they knew at each step they either had to show up differently or their team had to show up differently. And at certain points, they realized that they weren't the right people. So whether it be they brought in a CFO or they brought someone else who had the identity, who understood how to run a $100 million company. Now they get to a $100 million company and things are super successful and they think nothing could be better. And they realize, wow, we're hundreds of millions of dollars. And how do we get to that $1 billion mark? Well, it was simple. They needed a team around them who could assist them. They needed a team who they could work with. They needed to empower people around them who were investable in those areas that understood billions of dollars. And so what they did is they brought that along. And in the end, what they did was they created that traction, that success that we all look at. And what I just showed you is probably not rocket science. I wouldn't say it's anything you haven't heard before, but I can tell you from personal experience watching and talking with some of these people, that's what it took to get there. It was constantly coming up against something, being resourceful, overcoming it, and moving on. And when you can master that, when your team can master that, when your company can master that with its product or service, what you're going to have is you're going to have a business that is investable. You're going to have a business that can drive enterprise value, which we're going to talk about at the end. But at the end of the day, when you start to do that, what you're going to do is you're going to find you've built something that attracts investors, that attracts customers, and that attracts team members. And so with that, I want to dive right in. That was a little bit just to kind of set you guys up so you understand when we're talking about Be Investable, what that means. I'm going to dive into the 7 items that we have here. And the first one is the idea of wealth, the idea of creating wealth is having the ideal beliefs. And probably some of you are saying, wait a minute, you just brought the word wealth into this. And yes, I did. And wealth is part of this conversation. And so with that, I'd love to hear from you guys. What does wealth mean to you? We all got into this for a different reason, which I'm gonna label as the word wealth. But what does that mean to you? What does wealth look like to you as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, as an emerging company, as a small business? What does wealth look like for you in your business, for you and your family, for you and your team members, for you and your co-founder? What does that mean when you hear the word wealth? And it's a little bit different for all of us. Amanda, did we get a couple responses there?
I have one, being financially independent.
Okay. Anyone else?
Oh, here's a
If
couple
we were
more.
in a room, I'd call on you. Okay.
Complete financial freedom to make a real impact in the world.
Awesome. Anyone else? Do we have any more? Anyone like to share? The cool part is that we don't know who you are.
Having sufficient capital to solve those problems that money can solve. And then business health is another one.
Awesome. Cool. So most of us tend to, and obviously given the nature of this call, most of us tend to move towards a financial amount. Some people, when I do these presentations, they actually come up with a dollar amount. All right, they say, wealth to me is $5 million, or wealth to me is $26.3 million, or wealth to me is $100 million, or wealth to me is $1 billion. And those are all great answers. And the cool part about wealth is I don't feel there's a right or wrong answer. All I'm suggesting is you have to have the ideal beliefs to what that looks like. Because if you don't know where you're going, you're definitely not going to get there. And so with the ideal beliefs, it's possible to get there. And so, I'd like you to try on one of the definitions that I found to be very valuable for myself and some of the people we work with is wealth is the ability to afford all the things and experiences required to fully experience your most authentic life. And for everyone, that's a little bit different. And that's the cool part about that definition is that you get to define what that is. But I can promise you this is that if you don't have those beliefs in place for what wealth is, if you and your team don't have an identity around that, if you don't have a belief system around that, it's going to be really challenging to be investable. And on each one of these items, I could give you dozens of examples. And, maybe in a later call or in a follow-up, we can do that. But I can tell you every time we work with an entrepreneur, if they don't believe they're worth $1 million, or they don't believe they can ask for $1 million, or they don't believe they know anyone who has $1 million, I can almost guarantee you they're going to have a difficult time raising millions of dollars. And that goes on. You can take that number and add or subtract zeros. If it's $10 million, same type of thing. If it's $100,000, the same type of thing. At the end of the day, what you focus on, you're going to find. At the end of the day, people have certain identity around money, around wealth. And so the real thing you want to look at is what is your belief system around going out and raising money? What is your belief system around that money you want? If you don't feel you have something that's investable, do you think the investors are going to think that? So it's really important to have that belief in place. The second thing I would say is that wealth is being driven by outcomes. Said a different way, you could use the word traction in there. Results, goals. At the end of the day, I tell entrepreneurs all the time, when you get on the fundraising track, an investor is going to meet you day 5. And you're going to expect they invest, but they don't. And what they do is they sit there and wait on the sidelines. And they do this strategically sometimes. They may wait 60 days. They may wait 30 days to see what kind of traction you build. Now, if you have other things in place and you demonstrate you're investable, they're more likely to move quickly. But a lot of times they're looking, can this person produce outcomes? Can they produce results? Can they demonstrate traction? There's no wonder why when a company has a certain amount of users or a certain amount of product sales or some other KPI that really makes sense, it becomes a lot easier because at the end of the day in business, entrepreneur or investors are looking for entrepreneurs that have a problem that they're solving, that they can solve for a mass scale so it can exponentially grow if they invest in it, and that they can do it for less money they sell it for. So can you make a profit selling to a large group of people your product or solution or service that's a solution to a problem? That's what they're looking for. And if you can demonstrate outcomes around that, that's going to make a huge difference. If you can't, you got to evaluate and say, okay, why are we not achieving those outcomes? Or are we really in a market or with a product or service that really fits? And that may be where you need to stop and pivot. And there's nothing wrong with that. The third thing that I would say is the wealth is staying focused. At the end of the day, this happens to all of us. Most of us, if you're 1, 3, 5, 10, even 20 employees, we're all trying to wear multiple hats and put out as many fires as we can. At the end of the day, things will get us distracted. And I just got a client that came to me. He's doing decent, but his company's hit a couple brick walls. He's sitting there, and we were just talking last week about what he needs to do to really stay focused, get some outcomes, which would be generating revenue, and then putting together the necessary information to be able to attract investors. And all of a sudden this week, I got an email from him that he's planning on hosting a golf outing. Now, I love golf. And there's nothing wrong with that. And there's probably some good PR and networking in there. But if he was sitting in my office, I'd say to him, what does this have to do with the outcomes that we created? How is this going to help us achieve that? And if it isn't in alignment, that's out of focus. I don't know the answer to that, so maybe it isn't focus. But for so many of us, we do that all the time. Well, I'm just going to go to this conference because it looks really cool, because my friends are going, because my peers are going. Okay, but is that in line with your outcome? And if your outcome is, hey, I need to raise capital, you should stay focused on the outcomes that you need to produce, the traction, the KPIs you need to hit, and building a network that's going to assist you in going out to raise that capital. Anything outside of that is out of focus. On a total side note, you'll notice I use pictures of certain, what I would say, celebrity or famous individuals that are entrepreneurial in nature, and their spirit, their essence tends to be in line with these. This one happens to be one of my favorite, and he stayed focused long after everyone else got bored with it. You know, his goal was to make a dent in the universe, and while he's no longer with us, I think he did one heck of a job doing that. You know, and one thing I always ask people when they're getting focused, I say, what are your beliefs about today? What do you believe about what you're setting out to do? And really, you know, every day this is an easy task I give entrepreneurs, but if you're having a hard time staying focused, because it is easy, what are your belief about what you need to get done today? So whatever it may be, hey, I need to focus on sales. Sales needs to be a great focus today. Or, you know, maybe it's in your personal life. Hey, I need to work on my health today. Or, hey, I need to have some work-life balance. Or it's, hey, I really need to focus on, I need to be able to attract some great salespeople in my organization or other talent to organization. What are your beliefs around that? Because it starts with that. Then you write down, what are your priorities? Not what you need to do, but what are your priorities? Okay, so if it was that I have an amazing organization, my belief is I have an amazing organization, I'm going to attract great salespeople. My top priority would be making sure I understand what I need in that salespeople, making sure I understand how I'm going to compensate them, making sure I know how to train them, and making sure I have enough product or service to deliver when they start selling. Those would be my top 4 priorities. From there, I could go in and I could say, what are the tasks I need to do to complete those today? And as an entrepreneur, that's not how our brain thinks. Our brain thinks, oh, I got to get this done. I got to get this done. Oh, I got these 3 emails. Oh, no, now there's a proposal to get out. Oh, I got to do this. Oh, by the way, I got to do that resume. And next thing you know, it's 7 o'clock. You're at the coffee shop. You haven't, or your co-work space. You haven't gotten everything done, and you're stressing out. And it's because you didn't start the day focused. And so it's such an important part of being an entrepreneur. Number 4 is an important one. It's about being innovative. It's about being willing to be disruptive in your thoughts. It's about being willing to think outside the box. You know, I always talk to entrepreneurs, and I try to understand what their technology is, if they're disruptive. Not do they have to have a patent, but do they have something that they're doing that is disruptive, that is innovative, that's making a difference? Because at the end of the day, you can either be revolutionary or evolutionary. There's nothing wrong with being evolutionary, making a bigger, better, faster mousetrap or a wheel. That's great. But when you're revolutionary, that's the most important. Sorry about that. So at the end of the day, what you want to do is with knowledge, you can be innovative. You can innovate. And so what I always tell people is understand where you're at. So many people come and say, well, I want to do this. And I really start to ask them, what do they really know? When an investor is sitting with you to give you money, they're going to want to know that you or someone on your team has a deep, intimate knowledge, has subject matter expertise in what's going on. They're going to want to understand that someone on the team can provide that, because it is from that place that innovation can occur. You know, I get to work with amazing faculty out of universities, and it's unbelievable the inventions they come up with. And the reason they're able to do that is they know so much. They're able to find the gaps or the holes and patent that information. And that's where those patents will come from. Or in corporations that have been around, and I had the pleasure of working with corporations that have been around over a century. And it's great to see them. And they say, you know, we know this subject matter inside and out better than anyone else does. And we are able to ultimately identify where there's opportunities to innovate. You know, people will also often ask me to speak on innovation, and it's really funny to me because innovation is creativity. Creativity comes from filling yourself with ideas and knowledge and reading and studying and observing, and that's where it comes from, and the ability to think in a little bit different way, and the ability to think outside the box, and the ability to think in someone else's shoes. That's the ability to innovate. And so when you gain that knowledge, that's where it can really come from. You know, as an entrepreneur, I ask the most basic questions. What problem are you solving? How do you solve it? Why are you the right person to solve it? Who are you solving it for? Is the target market big enough? And can you do it for less money than you can sell it for? Having that knowledge is critical to being able to speak with an investor, to being able to grow your business. This basic knowledge, if you don't have this, it's going to be really hard to innovate, and it's going to be almost impossible to pivot. But when you have all this information, it starts to open up new doors. It starts to give you new perspectives. It allows you to take a step back and see things a little bit differently. So that fourth one of really being able to innovate is a big one. The fifth one that we have is about wealth. And wealth is about being eternally motivated. And so when you are internally motivated by the inside, that allows you to be executing. Now you execute with skills. And so at the end of the day, we always talk about, or you hear about, being an entrepreneur is about sticking with it long after it's no longer fun. That we see that one before. We talk about, being an entrepreneur is about living a life that no one else will live so you can have a life that no one else has. You've seen all those memes on social media. What I'm talking about is you have to have an internal motivation, a motivation that's going to move you over these obstacles. So when you see that brick wall, you have to be willing to step back and go, I could get over it with a ladder. I could be resourceful and get around it with this. And then you have to have the skills to actually execute on it. And so that's an important part. It's not just enough to say, I know how to solve the problem, but actually being able to solve the problem is just as valuable. So with those skills, you can execute. Now, the nice thing about business is you don't have to learn all these skills. On the screen is a list of skills, just some of them that go into running a business. Now, you don't have to be a lawyer to be able to have those skills. The nice thing about skills is you can attract talent, you can hire talent, you can bring on co-founders, you can come up with strategic partnerships or joint ventures that give you a lot of these resources. And so now when you go to speak to an investor, or you're going to bring someone aboard and they're asking you, great, you have the knowledge, you seem passionate, that's all great. Do you have the skills to actually execute on this? Can you actually run this playbook that you're telling me you have? And do you have all these people in place, or have you identified where you can find these people? And those are all important parts to being able to move forward, because people who understand each of these areas can execute. People who don't procrastinate on them. If you don't write anything else down, write that one down. People who have these skills will execute. People who don't have those skills will procrastinate. People who are procrastinating do it for a few reasons, but one of them that relates to this is that when you don't know how to do something, you let it sit on your desk or you let it sit in your inbox. And that's not a bad thing. Don't make yourself wrong for that. Just be able to see that and say, wow, I need to add someone to the team who can do that. And so that's an important part, is having those skills. Because as you get, if you think about it and kind of fast forward ahead of all this, Michael, this has been great, but when I get that pitch deck, there's going to be a slide. And the investor is going to want to be told, we have a team that can execute. That's what this is about. We have a team, forget about everything else, that if you were to give us this money, we have a team with the right culture who can execute. So that's number 5. And number 6 is the ability to deal with uncertainty. Probably one of my favorite ones of the 7 that we deal with. And Sir Richard Branson, just his story is amazing if you haven't studied it, learning a little bit about him and his ability to deal with uncertainty, which started from an early age, that he's been super successful in doing that. Or, some people have heard the story, but I'll really quickly, for those of you who haven't, at an early age, Sir Richard Branson, he wasn't a sir back then, his mom took him out and dropped him off and left him to get home. Now, this was before the days of cell phones and all the other technology we had, and he had to be resourceful. He had to face uncertainty, and he had to get home. Now, on a side note, today, if we did this, child custody services would maybe come after us. But in that day, from what I've read, he used to get home, and he used to be able to deal with that. And it doesn't surprise me when you look at his track record and how he got into business and how he did things, is he saw a problem, an obstacle. He was resourceful about it. He stepped into uncertainty where other people wouldn't, and he found an opportunity, and the whole way he did it having fun. If that's not a recipe for success, I don't know what is. And so he just did an amazing job with that, dealing with the uncertainty. Because with the right attitude, you can deal with uncertainty. None of us love uncertainty, but we want to have the right attitude for it. And people will often ask, well, what does that mean, having the right attitude? I use the word fun. Fun gets more done. I have a client that says it all the time. At the end of the day, you want to be able to have the right mindset and beliefs. You want to have the right work ethic. You want to have awareness. You want to practice emotional intelligence. You want to be flexible, adaptable, resourceful, positive, grateful. You want to be visionary. You want to have passion. You want to be purpose-driven. You want to be coachable. You want to be a team builder. You want to be authentic. Right? I'll tell you, I get the pleasure and honor of meeting thousands of entrepreneurs every year. And I get to work with hundreds as clients on an annual basis. And it's really interesting. The ones that move quickly and get really successful, they carry some of these same traits. This isn't just made up. This isn't just because I thought this would be fun to present today. This is based on working with thousands of entrepreneurs over the year. The team at Be Investable and myself have had great experiences. Some of our biggest clients are billionaires with companies that you would recognize. Some of them are millionaires that you'd never know, but they have a very good, successful business where they're able to empower a team around them. And some of them are even less from a financial standpoint but they all have the wealth that they want in their lives. And we have a system with that. And a lot of it comes back to these slides that we talk about and having these 6 things. And so when we talk about being investable, you're going to say, well, that's great, Michael, but I want to know how to go out tomorrow and raise some capital. I totally get it. We're entrepreneurs and we want to be in action yesterday. And you want it all done yesterday. Totally get it. I was there myself at one point. And so the 7th one, I just want to go over. And if you want to be able to do that, if you want to master being investable, all these things are great. And you need to you or someone on your team or your co-founder should have these. The most important one we save for last is the ability to build value. The ability to build value is so important. And you're saying, okay, what does that mean? Building value is a key part of success, of creating wealth. That value comes in the form of value for your customers. It comes in the form of value for your team members, for your co-founders, and it comes in the form of value for your investors. And when you can drive your value, and often in business they call it enterprise value, attracting resources is not a challenge. It will not be an obstacle. Most people, though, don't move from this mindset. Most people don't focus on creating value. We focus on making a sale. We focus on driving towards a goal. And we don't focus on the value. Because at the end of the day, being investable, there's not a wrong answer. But if the question is how can I be investable to raise money? Create value. Because if you look at the definition of being investable, it's someone's willingness to put typically money into an asset or a vehicle that can produce more money, which, without getting into the Webster's dictionary, is very close to the definition of creating value. And so when you look at that, it's such an important part. By creating value, you can create wealth. And that's really where the Be Investable concept really came from. That's where we really focused on how do we do this? How do we create this? Because at the end of the day, when you look at this, the ability to create value is how you're able to create an investable product. So if you think about it, so you say, okay, what does that mean to my clients? Well, if a client perceives that there's value, they will purchase. If they don't perceive value, they won't purchase. If you find yourself walking into clients and you're getting the meetings and they're not buying, it's because they're most likely not perceiving the value. If I today told you, hey, I have an opportunity, you can buy this thing, whatever it may be, product or service, and tomorrow it's worth 5 times what you paid for it, I would venture to say that most people would have a hard time saying no to that. Now you would say, well, what if I didn't have the money? If I guaranteed you that you would have 5 times your money tomorrow, would you find the money? And more than likely, and there's always going to be someone in the crowd that says no, but more than likely the answer would be yes. So when you can demonstrate that value to your customers or something similar to that, when you can speak to their pain point and not just, hey, you can be a little more efficient, but a true pain point. If you can demonstrate how you're going to make them more money, if you're going to demonstrate how you're going to keep them talent, which also makes them more money, if you're going to demonstrate to them how they're going to be able to sell for more money, those are all ways that enterprise value and driving value allows that to happen for your customer. And the other side is your investors. Well, it's obvious to investors. If investors feel there's value, they're going to be interested in the investment. It's when they don't feel you've mitigated the risk and there's a liability and it's not value, they're less likely to. And take candidates. I get it. I'll give you 2 sides of it. Often the best talent goes for the highest price and it's difficult to get them. But there's certain people that are able to snag really good talent away from a competitor and they're not paying them more. It's because they're providing value outside of money to them in the form of culture. And so that's an important way to be able to do that with team members. I have people reach out to me all the time, well, I need a co-founder for my business. My question always back to them is, what value are you giving that co-founder? The other side of it would be is to team members, is just making sure that your team members feel value, feel empowered, and that's how you start to create an investable organization. Because I can tell you that if you have an organization that demonstrates value in those three areas, it will demonstrate the attitude, skills, and knowledge to be investable. So at the end of the day, people ask how we typically do that. And so, this is what we do at a high level. And you may say, we've already done some of these things. Well, great. Then you're already well down the way. But we typically start out with a vision. We always make sure people have a vision. Remember, the first thing I said was the ideal beliefs. You got to know where you're going. And I'm not talking about where you're going next week or next month or next year. I love doing an exercise with someone and asking them to really tell me, where are you going to be in 5 years? Not some pro forma that looks good for investors so they get a return, but where do you want to be? Why did you start this business? What got you into this? What is the vision that's going to take you there? Because from that vision, that's where everything else gets created. And if the answer is, well, hey, I just hated my corporate job, so I'm going to do this because it seems better, there's nothing wrong with that. That's a difficult place to get investable from. But when your vision is something that gets you out of bed, that gets you motivated, that gets you moving, that empowers other people, you're going to start to see that that's going to create growth. From there, inevitably, you're going to need a team, a co-founder. You're going to need people around you. And that's where that word culture comes in. And you're going to need to be able to have that. And that's an important part, is to make sure people are rowing the boat the same way. Right? At the end of the day, we hear a lot about that, and we want to make sure that that's in place. And the last thing is really that value that we talked about. And I'm going to talk a little, I'm going to wrapping up the last few minutes, I'm going to talk about that. Because at the end of the day, most people just come and they say, Michael, I'm interested in this Be Investable. I'm interested in what you're talking about. I'm interested in what you do as a lawyer because I want money. There's nothing wrong with that. I appreciate it. And I just tell them, I say, I'm sorry, I can't help get you money. And they usually get a little confused by that, because then I usually follow up and say, but I can teach you how to fish and have fun doing it. And they always look at me really weird when it comes to that. And because at the end of the day, I use that as an analogy, is that I could probably go out to one of my connections or one of my many connections on LinkedIn, and I can make an introduction. And that hopefully will get you some money. And, half the time it gets a warm introduction and sometimes leads to money. But at the end of the day, all I did was feed someone for a day. When I take the time to work with my entrepreneurs to teach them how to be investable, I've taught them a skill set that applies the rest of their life. I've taught them a skill set that impacts their entire organization. I've taught them a skill set that can ultimately transform all the people they come in contact with. And that's why we take the time to really teach people not what it takes to get money. Because if that was the goal, I'd call it get money. How to get money. And that would be the presentation, and I'd talk to you about it, and I'd tell you the 10 steps to do it, and it'd be super simple, and we could do that. And some people want that. But the problem with that is it doesn't create the true change that you really need. Because at the end of the day, you guys all had an idea that you wanted to get somewhere and take you there. And as we said before, there was a gap there. And you come up and you say, well, if you can just give me the money, then I'm going to be there. That's all I need, is just give me the money. If I had the money, I could get there. I'm here to tell you there is trillions of dollars of dry powder sitting on the sidelines. For those of you who have never heard that before, you're probably saying, dry powder, what does that mean? What I'm saying to you is that there is literally trillions of dollars in angel money, venture capital money, and private equity. I don't know if statistically, but I would venture to say more money than there's ever been in history is out looking for deals, is out looking for investment. And if you can show that you are investable, if you can show your idea is investable, if you can show that your team is investable, your chances of attracting that money go up significantly. But if you just want to say, well, if the money just came to me, then it'd be all better. Yes, you're right, but that's not how you're going to get there. If your obstacle is that you need money, that brick wall is there, my question to you is, how are you going to be resourceful to be able to put together what's necessary to create value? Because when you do that, there's plenty of money out there. Plenty of money. Because at the end of the day, people just think that money is going to create that bridge for you. And while it will, and it may sometimes short-term do that for you, an investor knows the truth. And an investor knows that if you don't do the work, you're not going to finish the race. Anyone can sign up for a race and can get started, but to truly finish is the real challenge. And that's why we really take the time to work with people to go through this process. You know, something that's interesting back about this slide for a second is, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the lottery syndrome. The lottery syndrome is a situation where a majority, if not a supermajority, of all lottery winners within 1 year are in a worse financial situation than they started. And how is that humanly possible? That someone who earned received millions or tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars could be in a worse financial situation they were a year ago. It doesn't, in my mind, it doesn't compute. But when you begin to look at the psychology, they didn't have the identity of wealth. They didn't attract the right things around them, and all they ended up was in the same place or worse place than where they were. And I would venture to say, I always normally at this point stop and ask entrepreneurs, how much money are you raising? So if we could just want to take a second, if people are out there raising, how much money are you raising? You know, and you may say, hey, I'm not ready to raise yet, or I'm just in a family and friends round. Maybe you don't want to put the actual dollar amount. Maybe you say, hey, I'm on Series A and we're raising 1 million or 3 million or something like that. Or you may say, hey, I'm a successful business, but I want to go to the next level. I'm looking for private equity to take me out at $20 to $50 million. Whatever it may be, they're all the right answers. Just, do you have some numbers out there? Amanda, did we get any responses on that?
Yeah, I have one that's 1 million to 1.5 million seed round.
Awesome. Is anyone, I got to imagine out of the 100 plus people on this call, there's got to be more than one person raising a little capital. If so, how much are you raising out there?
5 million first round is another one.
That's awesome.
1 million seed round.
Awesome. And I really appreciate it. I'm proud of you guys that do respond, because being in action, being part of this, it makes it a little more interactive. So thank you for that. I know it can be hard sitting on the webinar, so thank you for your participation. Any other ones that came in, Amanda?
Looks like one more. Would like to raise 3 million in the fall.
Awesome. So we got a few answers, and thank you for that. And other people, you probably have a number in your head, or maybe it's not a number. Maybe it's, I need a co-founder. Maybe it's, I need to hire 10 employees. Maybe I need 20 people for my company. Whatever the resource is, come up with it. Say it to yourself. No one else can hear you. But my question to you would be, have you ever done that before? And if the answer is yes, you're well on your way to being investable. But I would say 98% of the time when I ask that question, most people have not actually done what they're about to do. Now, I don't know about you guys, but anytime that I've gone to do anything that I've never done before, it can be pretty scary. Fear can set in. It can be very challenging. And so if you don't have a plan for how to get there, what are your chances of success? Well, I'd venture to say they go down significantly. And so quite often entrepreneurs will say, well, I know how to raise money, or I watched a video on it, or, you know, I got an accountant and a lawyer, and me and my co-founder, we know how to do it. We raised $100,000 before. Well, I can tell you raising $1 million is not raising $100,000. Now, I'm not saying you can't do it. That's not what I said at all. But what I am saying is it's a different experience, and to really understand that is so important. I have entrepreneurs that come to me all the time, every week, and they say, well, I already have this in place, or I've already done this, or I've already talked to these people. And I'm like, that's great. Are you willing to learn? Are you willing to let me show you how to be resourceful to create value? And they always say yes. And when they do, what we do is we take them through that process of what it takes to go through here. Because what we do is we start them out and we go through their vision. And if you want to write down what does it mean to be investable, this is the process. You can do it on your own if you have all the resources. This is what we spend our time working with entrepreneurs to do when they ask us to help them raise money, is we start out with their vision and we work them through that. From there, we work on the financial story. Notice I use the word story, not projections, not pro forma, nothing like that. And I'm very, very specific when we say a financial story, because when you can tell a story, people get engaged. When you throw up numbers on them, they're not as interested. From there, we have them really look at their product or services grid. What are they offering? What does that offering really look like? And understand that customer discovery portion of it. From there, we actually ask them to put a strategy together. Surprising to me, most entrepreneurs have never truly done this at the detailed level I'm talking about. I'm talking about the getting down to the minutia of what would have to get done. If you were using a project management tool or like a base camp, what if you had to write down your game plan for the next 5 years and have put every task in there, every outcome you need in there, everything in there? Most people have never taken the time to do that. That is a mental exercise that pushes people. It's part of, taking people to the mental gym that we don't go to in business. And that's a really important part. And notice it's at the bottom because it can be the most challenging. If people don't make it through there, it's hard to get them to the next point. But when they do the work to get through building a strategy, what happens next is we're able to take that and boil it down into a strategic plan that turns into an executive summary. From there, we get a pitch deck. And only from there, we go out and do the fundraising. And if you noticed, as we get ready to wrap up here, is that I didn't put a pitch deck at the beginning. The pitch deck comes at the end after you've gained all the knowledge and figured out where your skill set is, and you've had the attitude to make it through. It's only then that you can put together that pitch deck to go out and ask for money. If you do it before, it becomes much more challenging. Now, I'm not saying you can't create a pitch deck and go raise money. We've done it before. But I can tell you when you follow this, it results in amazing results. I mean, I can tell you multiple companies we've worked with will go through this, and whether they're raising 6 figures, 7 figures, and even 8 figures, they're able to do it about that quick once they get out there going because they've done all the work to prepare for it. And that's how you build a sustainable bridge to be able to get to where you want to go. And that we talked about as it relates to money because most of you showed up to talk about Be Investable. But if you took out money, you put some other resource in there, the same thing applies. If you're looking to build a co-founder, find a co-founder. If you're looking to build an office with 20 employees or 100 employees, the same thing applies. If you already have the funding or the funding is not the most important part, going through this process is such an integral part of what it takes to be investable. So again, I want to thank you for your time. Today we talked about the 7 keys to being investable. This last slide is the reason why I do these presentations. It's because I get to ask every one of you, what would you do if you could not fail? And in that is probably some of how you could become investable to yourself, to your clients, to your customers, and ultimately to your investors. So again, if you enjoyed what we talked about today, I want to thank you. Please feel free to check out our podcast. If you are in the Midwest, come by one of our events, and you can always check out one of our magazines. And thank you so much for your time. I loved sharing this with you. With that, Amanda, I'll turn it back over to you for a Q&A.
Yeah, so we have a question from Peter. He is wondering about your advice on how you find people. If you know your strengths and weaknesses and need to find the co-founder, partners, or investors, how do you find the team members to build your network?
So when you're looking for team members, right, I think part of that is what type of value do you have for them? And so I think that's a mixture of in a form of compensation. Most of us go to work to earn an income. And so there's some compensation. So being able to explain to someone at the very high level, hey, I'm hiring this position, and here's the roles and responsibilities. And for that, you're going to receive this compensation, whether it be financial or equity or a combination hybrid thereof. You're going to have that. And by the way, this is our culture. This is our office. This is how we interact. This is the vision. This is what we're looking to do. It is from that place so you can actually go out and make an ask. Without that, it's not as strong of an ask. And so the ability to put that together and make that ask is an important part, and you need to have those pieces in place. From there, you can go talk to people. I mean, at a tactical level, if you're saying, how do I go find those people? I'd go back and say, okay, right now, how do you find those people is the brick wall. How do we get resourceful to overcome that brick wall? So Peter's asking, how do we connect with people? I think this was a room I'd probably open up to the audience because it's a webinar. I'll probably say social media channels, LinkedIn. LinkedIn is one of the best resources you could have. Going to Gust or going to an Angels List, great resources. Angels List is a great place. You get to post free jobs there. And so those are great places to go find people. But remember, it's going to be really challenging to make a post, or the post you're going to make is going to get little to no interaction if you can't answer the questions I laid out up front. The other thing is networking, going to events, showing up to meetups, showing up to events, showing up to conferences. Now, if your number one outcome is that I need to hire people, then you'd be really focused to go to a conference that has people that are people that would fit that role for what you're looking for. So I recently interviewed the gentleman who has a COO alliance. It's a bunch of COOs. If you needed a COO for your organization, you were at that level. That'd be a really good place to go talk to someone. If you're looking for a developer or a coder, it'd probably be really good to put yourself in conversations, groups, chats, events, conferences where the coders that code in the language you need, in the industry you need are. Those are great ways. Challenges. Challenge events are awesome ways to go connect. All the ecosystem, I get to work with ecosystems around the country. There are a lot of ecosystems that have different events and give you different chances to connect with people. And so those would be great ones. And always, if I didn't answer your question in enough detail, you can always feel free to get with Amanda, and then you can contact and I can go into more detail. But great question, Peter. Was there another one, Amanda?
Yeah, and also on that line, I will send a follow-up email after this to all the attendees and include everybody's contact information, so everyone will have it. Next question
Great.
is, can you talk more about the components of the business strategy? How do you create a roadmap? What are the considerations and what must be included?
Absolutely. So at the end of the day, the goal is if you went through the process, you're most likely, whether it be from your vision, from your financial story, from your product and service grid, from that first phase, you're going to identify something where you're not at yet. So you're going to have a gap. And so inevitably, the strategy is how do you build that gap? And so at the end of the day, I had a client that they wanted to build a $100 million company. And so we went through the strategy process and began to look at that. And we take people through a 3-step process to really take them through. And it really starts focusing on where they want to go, what are their goals, and really how do we boil that down. And then behind that is why that's important and really beginning to prioritize. And from there, we really get into the granular of what those details look like. If you were to have that goal and it was a priority over everything else, what needs to happen? What are the tasks that need to occur? And so we basically will take people through that process that we use to be able to get them ready to have that strategy. Because at the end of the day, when you think about a strategy, the strategy is not about tactics. I don't need to know how to do something at first. First, I need to understand the problem that needs to be solved and whether or not that problem is important. And depending on how important it is and why it's important, then we can really determine an answer for that or a solution. And a lot of times what will happen, I don't know the gentleman or the woman who asked that question, but a lot of times what will happen is we'll realize and say, I don't know how to answer this. And that is a perfect time to go find a mentor, to go find an advisor. So often people call someone up and say, hey, will you be my mentor? Will you be my advisor? That's a very humbling and honoring question to ask. But imagine how much more powerful that ask is if you said, hey, I'd really like you to be my advisor, and here's why. Because this is the obstacle we're facing, and I don't know how to solve this. I had a client who was in the hospitality business, and he posed me a question. I said, well, who are you going to go ask to solve this? I don't want to give you the strategy. Who are you going to ask? And he went out and found one of the best in the industry and contacted them and said, here's my problem. Would you help me? And they said, no, but I know someone who will. When my clients call me with a problem or they call me with an issue, I go out to my network and I say, hey, listen, I have a client. This is what they're looking for. Can you help them with that? Because I know that helps them to create that strategy they're looking for. And so a lot of times, part of the strategic process of building that strategy is the ability to be able to understand the answers, because we don't have the answers inside of us and our team doesn't have the answers. That's where it comes from. And then what you do is you memorialize it. Some people put it in a PowerPoint, some people put it in a Word, some people immediately turn it into, a spreadsheet or a Gantt chart or a Basecamp. There's not a right or wrong. I think everyone has different processes and systems set up for their business and whatever fits for them. The goal is you got to get to an actionable list that you can actually tactically execute on. That's the goal of the process. And I can promise you it doesn't come from saying, what are the 100 things we need to get done? You're never going to get to at that point. If you didn't hear anything else about this question, this answer is that so many times people say, well, I'll build a strategy. I'm just going to write down everything I need to do. That's not a strategy. That's a to-do list. That's a checklist. The key is taking the step up front and saying, what are the ultimate outcomes that create a gap? And then when I have that gap, how do I start to fill it? And those actions start to identify your priorities of what you need to do. And then you got to memorialize it somewhere. And it's not a whiteboard that gets washed away. It's not a piece of paper. It's something that's in front of you that you can be held accountable by your team, your partners, your investors. Great question.
Thanks. So next question is, for a 1 million raise, should we start with the toughest institutional investors or just take it from friends or family? What is the intelligent approach?
So that's a great question, and depending on where you're at in the world, and depending on what type of family and friends you have, obviously, if you can go to them, that can sometimes be the easier money to get. Not always, but a lot of times when you think about a business, that's a great question. A lot goes into that. Are you just starting out? Are you further along? Is that growth funding? Where is that money coming in? A lot of times that will help determine ultimately who you should be speaking to. I think there's two key points around that question. Is one is understanding the investor mindset. So different investors have different mindsets. One of the keys being their risk tolerance. Some investors are willing to take big risks. Those typically are family and friends. One step beyond that is typically some form of crowdfunding. Shortly after that is angel investing. And as I keep listing these, their risk tolerance goes down and down. Early stage venture capital comes next. Late stage venture capital comes after that. Ultimately, bank financing comes somewhere in there, and then private equity. And then most likely somewhere amongst those last 3 years, an IPO. And so it doesn't make a difference which one you're going to go to. So you say institutional investors, when you look at their investment mindset and their investment strategy, they tend to be risk adverse. And so if you're looking at traditional investment, institutional investors, they may not be as interested. If the question was referencing institutional investors in the sense of traditional venture capitalists, or yes, there's nothing wrong with going to them. There's pros and cons to each one. There's the way they negotiate the deal is going to differ from your family and friends typically. And again, I put a caveat in all this because you may have a family and friend that can be a little more strict with their terms, but traditionally speaking, family and friends round is going to be a little bit easier to work with than with a venture capitalist who is going to definitely be negotiating for the best deal. Because remember, their number one goal is to produce a return. That's it. They love you. They'll bring strategic value. Everything's great, but they got to show a return. And so it's super important to understand that. Your family and friend wants a return, but they still are going to hopefully love and care for you no matter what. Now that being said, the last thing I will say about that is it's interesting whoever asked that $1 million. I know nothing about your business, nothing about your industry, nothing where you're at. I would ask, is $1 million enough? And how do you know you need $1 million? And so that's one other thing to think about is that, I get people all the time say, I need $500,000, I need $1 million. I tell them to walk in my office yesterday, I need $3 million. I don't ever say no, that's not the right number. I just, depending on where someone is, depends how much they really need. Because at the end of the day, if you look at the funding cycle, people come in early on to invest a nominal amount to be able to get something off the ground. From there, they're expecting some other investors to put some more quote unquote fuel on the fire to continue to let it grow, and that dollar amount goes up. So if the first dollar amount was in the hundreds of thousands, the next is in the millions. If the first dollar amount was in the millions, the next is in the tens of millions. And the goal is to keep seeing that grow up. And when you see these companies that are getting valued as unicorns, it's because they started out with some small round. That some small round, after some traction and demonstrating value, turned into a bigger round. With more value, it turned into a bigger round, and with more value, it turned into a bigger round. And after 4, 5, 6, 7 rounds, you have this company that's hundreds or billions of dollars. And that's typically how it happens, but you also see different investors coming along that way. So it's a really great question, probably needs a little more. I have a few follow-up questions in order to truly be able to answer that, but I can't stress how important it is to understand the investor mindset. And it's not just the dollar amount someone's willing to invest, but also the industry. So I have a client right now that's doing really well that's in a consumer product. And I told them, don't bother walking into any tech investors. You can talk to them, but that's probably not the most and the best correct way. Remember the picture I showed was about fishing. If you were going in, depends on if you've ever been fishing, fish bite on different lures. You got to have the right lure to show to that investor if you're thinking about getting them to bite. And so really understanding your product, your service, and the industry and the stage of your company can definitely help to make the correct match to where the investor comes in. And that's where the various tools come in, and we use a lot of those to help with that, whether it be a pitch book or whether it be using something like a CB Insights or using some of the things that Gus has or some of the other great companies out there. Being able to do that research and understand is invaluable. Great question. Do we have any more?
I think we are all set, and we're just about out of time.
Awesome.
So it's perfect. Any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Once again, I just want to say thank you for having me on. I appreciate it. Thank you, Amanda. And then for all the participants, I really appreciate you taking the time in your busy schedules to come learn about what it takes to be investable. And if we can be of any assistance and help you, we'd love to know how we can help support you in your journey and your process. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Michael. And I will follow up via email with everybody by the end of today. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you. Yep.
Bye.
Bye-bye.